Walk into almost any casual dining restaurant on a typical Tuesday night, and you'll find a quiet room full of empty booths. The entire sector has been under severe financial pressure for over a decade. Delivery apps fundamentally changed consumer habits, economic shifts wiped out massive chains, and younger demographics are gravitating toward fast casual encounters or premium independent eateries. It really seems like the era of the sprawling suburban family restaurant is drawing to a close. Yet, in specific pockets of Canada, one particular brand routinely packs its dining rooms with families tearing into quarter chicken dinners. That brand is Swiss Chalet, and according to standard business logic, it should have faded into obscurity years ago. The menu centers entirely around basic rotisserie chicken and crinkle-cut fries served in a dining room that leans heavily into decades-old nostalgia. Even the brand name is a bizarre geographical misnomer. It has absolutely nothing to do with Switzerland and features zero traditional Swiss dishes. On the West Coast, regional publications were announcing permanent closures, food writers were tearing apart the famous dipping sauce, and activists were staging protests outside corporate headquarters. The brand was being written off from every direction. And yet, Swiss Chalet not only survived, but it kept growing. Nearly 200 locations across the country, a retail presence in every major grocery chain, and concrete plans for further expansion. To understand how a rotisserie chicken restaurant outlasted an entire generation of competition, we have to go back to the founder who started it all and the corporate empire that turned his one Toronto location into a national institution. The story begins in 1954 Toronto, right in the middle of the post-war economic boom when Canadians were eagerly looking for convenient, affordable ways to dine out. The man who saw this massive opportunity was a Montreal native named Rick Morin. Growing up, Morin helped his father Maurice run the Chalet barbecue restaurant in Montreal. Once he finished high school, he decided to strike out on his own and bring those family recipes to a brand new market, borrowing $25,000 from his dad to move to Toronto and launch his venture. While he originally wanted to call it Swiss Chalet BBQ to honor his roots, the Ontario business registration process required a distinct name that wouldn't clash with existing entities, leading him to simply settle on Swiss Chalet. He opened the first location at the corner of Bloor and Bedford in Toronto, inside a building featuring a streamlined, modernist structure defined by its clean geometric lines and stark white facade. Inside, he offered a remarkably straightforward menu centered entirely around a quarter chicken dinner served with a bun, a side of fries, and a proprietary dipping sauce. This strategy worked flawlessly, generating lines out the door and quickly proving the concept could be scaled across the entire province. The true genius of Morin's model was its operational simplicity. Because cooking whole rotisserie chickens required minimal specialized culinary training for the kitchen staff, and a highly limited menu naturally streamlined supply chains, the restaurant could easily reduce food waste and keep overhead costs incredibly low. That built-in efficiency allowed Swiss Chalet to maintain accessible pricing, quickly making it the default choice for Sunday family dinners across Ontario. As the brand expanded through the 1960s, it rapidly cemented itself into the cultural fabric of the region through absolute consistency. Customers knew exactly what the chicken would taste like every single time they ordered, just as they knew the sauce would always be served warm in a little glass bowl. While Swiss Chalet was quietly conquering the Sunday family dinner market, Rick Morin was already busy analyzing another massive gap in the Canadian food industry. In 1959, he decided to tackle the rapidly growing fast food sector by partnering with an entrepreneur named George Sokonik to launch a completely new hamburger concept. Morin originally intended to call his new burger venture Humphreys, but then he noticed a local Toronto car dealership called John Harvey Motors was going out of business and realized their massive exterior sign was readily available. He decided to simply adopt the name Harvey's to save money on manufacturing new exterior branding, and the partners opened their first location in Richmond Hill, Ontario, on a sprawling 10-acre parcel of land purchased from a bankrupt Dairy Queen operator. Morin immediately began applying the rigorous operational lessons he'd perfected at Swiss Chalet directly into this new hamburger chain. We've actually done a full deep dive on Harvey's in a more recent video, so if you're interested in that, I highly recommend you click the card link at the top corner of the video. All you need to know though is that the operational synergy between Swiss Chalet and Harvey's eventually became the absolute cornerstone of their long-term corporate strategy. Executives realized that putting the two brands together made perfect financial sense, leading them to frequently share real estate and co-locate both restaurants inside the exact same buildings. This dual branding strategy allowed the company to maximize foot traffic throughout the entire day while evenly splitting the massive overhead costs of suburban commercial leases. Families pulling into the parking lot could satisfy a craving for a sit-down rotisserie chicken dinner or a quick takeout hamburger without ever having to visit two separate locations. They successfully dominated prime real estate across the country by offering multiple distinct dining options under a single roof, effectively capturing different dining demographics simultaneously. After nearly 2 decades of building this highly efficient dual brand system, Moran decided it was time to step away from the daily grind of the hospitality business, selling his famous restaurant chains for a reported $15 million and permanently moving offshore to become a private investor. He relinquished control of the daily operations, but his original vision for standardized quality and shared real estate continued to directly shape the trajectory of the Canadian fast food industry for the next several decades. But a brand can only grow so far relying on local popularity before it desperately needs serious corporate machinery to take it to the national level. That necessary machinery arrived in the late 1970s in the form of Cara Operations, a massive Canadian hospitality conglomerate that originally began in the 1880s as the Canada Railway News Company. They had spent decades quietly dominating the travel catering industry by selling snacks on passenger trains and eventually supplying full in-flight meals to airlines across the entire country. When Cara officially acquired both Swiss Chalet and Harvey's, they immediately injected the massive capital reserves and the deep logistical infrastructure required to supercharge the expansion of both chains. They took the solid operational foundation Rick Moran had built and transformed Swiss Chalet from a highly successful regional chain into a dominant national force backed by unprecedented purchasing power. Under the aggressive ownership of Cara Operations, new Swiss Chalet locations rapidly popped up in retail plazas and suburban strip malls across the entire country. They leaned heavily into takeout and delivery services decades before the invention of modern smartphone applications or third-party delivery networks. The brand also marketed itself aggressively on TV by presenting the quarter chicken dinner as so good for so little.
Is it payday today? Nope. Tomorrow. What are we gonna do for lunch? Swiss Chalet? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Swiss Chalet.
Okay. Swiss Chalet charcoal broiled chicken, tangy chalet sauce, and fresh cut fries, all at a price that makes it easy to say, okay.
Everything okay?
Swiss Chalet. Swiss Chalet. Okay.
Cara then used the highly reliable daily cash flow generated by Swiss Chalet to acquire even more restaurant brands and build out a massive portfolio of casual dining properties. They pushed confidently into the United States and opened locations in border cities like Buffalo, New York, where cross-border shoppers had already developed a taste for the food and the iconic sauce. They also pushed hard out to the Canadian West Coast by setting up brand new restaurants in Vancouver and Victoria to capture the rapidly growing suburban markets in British Columbia. The corporate ambition even extended to opening a location in Puerto Rico just to test the waters of broad international franchising. The revenue numbers during this era were incredibly strong, making the brand appear completely unstoppable across multiple regional markets. Cara Operations successfully reaped the massive financial rewards of the original operational vision Rick Moran established decades prior, using that exact momentum to completely solidify their absolute dominance in the Canadian hospitality sector. The immense financial success of Cara Operations made owners, the Phelan family, incredibly wealthy, but that very wealth eventually threatened to destroy the entire conglomerate from the inside out. The internal dynamics of the family erupted into a bitter feud that dragged on for decades and nearly derailed the most dominant restaurant empire in the country. At the center of this dispute was the family patriarch, Paul James Phelan, a formidable businessman who simply refused to yield control of his life's work to the next generation. The absolute core of the conflict revolved around the voting rights attached to the preferred shares of Cara operations. Paul James Phelan tightly controlled these voting rights and actively resisted dividing the shares equally among his 4 children. He viewed his control of the company as an unshakable duty, and realizing the family was entirely deadlocked, the board brought in a polished, highly experienced family business consultant named David Bork to mediate the dispute and forge a sensible pathway forward. Bork laid out a highly logical framework, suggesting a strategy of share and share alike, meaning the massive income streams, corporate assets, and future opportunities should be divided equally among the 4 children and their respective families. The ultimate goal was to establish a fair system where the most talented members of the next generation could naturally rise to leadership positions without dismembering the Cara empire in the process. He even suggested that the opposing legal teams, specifically Gail Phelan's lawyer, Glenn MacArthur, and the patriarch's lawyer, Larry Hines, meet independently to jointly develop a concrete plan for the next steps. However, these perfectly sensible suggestions were largely ignored by a patriarch who refused to step aside and children who were tired of waiting. Meanwhile, the actual restaurant brands like Swiss Chalet were left entirely to fend for themselves without clear, unified leadership from the top. The broader retail environment was rapidly changing during this exact period, with new, fast casual concepts stealing market share and consumer tastes heavily leaning toward bolder international flavors. The internal corporate paralysis meant that Swiss Chalet was painfully slow to adapt to these shifting trends, which left the brand incredibly vulnerable, and it would soon have severe financial consequences in regional markets sitting far outside the safety of their traditional Ontario stronghold. In the early 2000s, Cara Operations was forced to retreat from Quebec entirely. They ran headfirst into an impenetrable wall named Saint-Hubert, a local rotisserie chicken behemoth that already dominated the French-Canadian market with its own fierce generational loyalty. The expansion into the United States also failed to gain any permanent traction despite some initial optimism surrounding the cross-border brand recognition. By 2010, the company permanently closed its 2 remaining locations in the suburbs of Buffalo, New York, effectively ending their American experiment. Just a year later, they quietly shut down their only operating restaurant in Puerto Rico, proving that the Swiss Chalet formula wasn't an easy plug-and-play export. However, the retreat from the Canadian West Coast was a particularly painful process. For decades, the brand had maintained a steady presence in British Columbia, but it never managed to achieve the deep cultural reverence that it enjoyed back in Ontario. As the modern food scene in cities like Vancouver and Victoria rapidly evolved into highly diverse, world-class culinary destinations, the straightforward quarter chicken dinner started to feel noticeably outdated. Customers on the West Coast were increasingly drawn to fresh, locally sourced ingredients, vibrant Pacific Rim flavors, and a booming independent restaurant culture. Against this highly competitive backdrop, local diners increasingly viewed the traditional Swiss Chalet menu as uninspired, making it incredibly difficult for franchisees to attract the younger demographics necessary for long-term survival. To make matters worse, profit margins began to shrink aggressively as commercial lease costs in the notoriously expensive British Columbia real estate market skyrocketed well beyond what a standard casual dining restaurant could realistically sustain. These events forced the corporate office to take a hard, unfiltered look at their product and their overall public perception. They realized they were actively losing the battle for the modern customer, and they desperately needed to figure out exactly why people were abandoning the brand in specific regions while remaining fiercely loyal in others. Whenever you start digging into exactly why people either fiercely love or actively hate Swiss Chalet, the entire conversation almost immediately centers the Chalet sauce. The sauce is arguably the single most polarizing condiment in Canadian culinary history. People routinely order extra cups just to pour it entirely over every single item on their plate, treating it less like a complimentary dipping sauce and more like a primary ingredient. The actual recipe remains a closely guarded corporate secret that's fundamentally defined the brand's unique identity ever since Rick Moran opened that very first location on Bloor Street. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum, critics view the sauce as a complete culinary disaster that defies logical explanation. A highly prominent review published in The Takeout by food writer Renee Suen described it as, quote, watery, viscous, and oddly sour. It still tastes like a flat Bloody Mary with a flaccid kick. While this level of polarization might seem like a massive problem for a national restaurant chain, it actually functions as a highly vital component of the brand's long-term survival strategy. The executive team fully understands that while the sauce actively turns a certain demographic away, it simultaneously creates a fiercely loyal core customer base that simply can't get this specific flavor profile anywhere else on the market. Competitors can easily buy industrial ovens and perfectly replicate a standard rotisserie chicken, but they can't legally replicate the distinct, sour, deeply nostalgic pull of authentic Chalet sauce. But one thing the sauce can't fix is the delicate relationship between the corporate head office and individual store owners. There's always been an expectation for individual store owners to maintain tight profit margins, leading to intense pressure between them and corporate. This growing friction inevitably boiled over into highly publicized conflicts, like in the small town of Napanee, Ontario, where the local operators of a combined Harvey's and Swiss Chalet location found themselves locked in a bitter legal war with their own parent company. Franchise owner Morgan Raya commented, "They just came in and shut the place down, changed the locks, and kicked us out." The franchisees refused to back down and immediately took the fight to the courts, getting the legal right to operate. But the highly publicized fight exposed the severe operational tension and absolute lack of trust between the wealthy head office and the people actually running the fryers on the ground. To make matters worse, at the exact same time, the brand faced intense coordinated pressure from external activist groups like Mercy for Animals, which launched highly aggressive public campaigns demanding that Swiss Chalet take a firm, transparent stand against animal abuse within their massive supply chain. As modern customers became increasingly conscious of animal welfare and sustainable food sourcing, these targeted campaigns did real, immeasurable damage to the brand's carefully cultivated, family-friendly image. The executive team found themselves trapped in a difficult position, forced to figure out exactly how to address these modern ethical concerns and clean up their supply chain without raising prices so high that they alienated their core working-class customer base. Recognizing that the Cara operations name was hopelessly weighed down by decades of public family feuds and toxic corporate infighting, the executive team finally decided that a massive rebranding was absolutely necessary. In 2018, Cara Operations officially changed its name to Recipe Unlimited. Operating under this new banner, the company immediately went on an aggressive acquisition spree, notably buying up the exclusive rights to all Canadian Olive Garden locations, strengthening their overall market position in the highly competitive casual dining sector. However, despite buying up new brands, the executives knew they still had to fix the struggling Swiss Chalet. It was a massive revenue driver for the conglomerate, but it desperately needed a serious operational overhaul to survive the impending decade. To bridge the widening gap between their aging, deeply loyal customer base and a highly skeptical younger demographic, Recipe Unlimited developed a comprehensive digital strategy, rolling out an innovative system called Chalet Valet, where customers could easily order and prepay on their mobile phones, park in a specially designated spot, and have their hot food brought directly to their car window. Meanwhile, inside the newly renovated brick-and-mortar locations, the company installed sleek digital ordering kiosks, allowing busy customers to completely bypass the traditional cashier. They also completely overhauled their clunky delivery application to make it highly intuitive, leaning heavily into their established partnership with the Scene Plus loyalty program to actively reward their most frequent diners. While the sweeping restaurant renovations and digital application upgrades were absolutely crucial for short-term survival during a tumultuous retail era, Recipe Unlimited pushed deeper into the grocery aisles. For years, the company had already found steady, quiet success selling powdered packets of their highly polarizing dipping sauce on retail shelves, but they decided it was time to aggressively expand the product line. They officially introduced a fully frozen Swiss Chalet chicken strips, savory frozen pot pies, and bottled liquid marinades directly to everyday supermarket consumers. Getting these consumer products directly onto major grocery store shelves accomplished two highly critical goals for the parent company. First, it provided an incredibly steady source of income that was heavily insulated from the skyrocketing costs of commercial real estate and unpredictable restaurant labor shortages. Second, and perhaps more importantly, the retail presence served as a relentless everyday marketing tool for the entire brand. Every single time a customer walked down the frozen food aisle during their weekly grocery run, they physically saw the iconic Swiss Chalet logo printed brightly on the packaging. This constant visual reinforcement actively kept the brand highly relevant and top of mind, even for busy people who hadn't actually stepped inside a physical dining room for several years. Furthermore, these grocery products allowed the company to easily reach customers out in British Columbia and other regional markets where the physical restaurants had closed down, ensuring the corporate brand name remained highly visible across the entire country regardless of local real estate and franchise dynamics. These modernization efforts triggered something the corporate team didn't fully anticipate: a genuine cultural comeback. The core menu never changed, but public perception around it did. In an era defined by expensive dining trends, overcomplicated menus, and aggressively shrinking portion sizes, the straightforward simplicity of a hot rotisserie chicken diner started feeling appealing again in a way it hadn't in years. The brand began attracting serious outside attention to validate that shift. A detailed review by Mary Meisenzahl in Business Insider specifically praised the Swiss Chalet crispy chicken sandwich, telling her American audience that it easily rivaled the best offerings in the highly competitive US fast food market. She also talked about the economic value. A substantial meal for two came to roughly 51 Canadian dollars and kept them full for hours. That kind of third-party validation from an international publication signaled that Swiss Chalet was delivering a product that held up against modern culinary standards, and everyday customers agreed. The brand was officially voted as one of the most trusted casual restaurants for family dining by Canadian shoppers in the 2026 BrandSpark Canadian Trust study. Ultimately, the survival of Swiss Chalet proves something the modern restaurant industry keeps on having to relearn. A legacy brand can't coast on childhood memories. To stay alive, the company had to fiercely protect core menu items like the quarter chicken and the signature sauce while modernizing everything around it. It's still the same brand from decades ago, but how they conduct their business is completely modern. But what do you think about the survival of this historic Canadian brand? Do you still order the quarter chicken dinner when you want a reliable meal? Or do you think the famous Chalet sauce belongs in the trash? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, and thank you guys so much for watching, and be sure to stay curious.